My name is Priya Anand. I'm 29. The night before the most important interview of my life, my sister poured bleach across the only blazer I owned, and when I confronted my parents about it, my father told me to lower my voice before I embarrassed the family in front of the neighbors. I wore that blazer to the interview anyway, and the man who greeted me at the door of Meridian Capital, one of the most competitive fellowship programs in corporate law, looked at the bleach stains across my shoulder, then down at the name printed on my resume, and his entire expression shifted. "Wait," he said slowly, "you're her?" Before I explain what he meant by that, let me take you back 4 years, because none of this makes sense without understanding exactly what my parents had been quietly doing to me long before that blazer was ever ruined. If you're the kind of person who watches these stories all the way through, go ahead and subscribe, but only if you actually mean it. And drop your city and local time in the comments. I read every one. I grew up in Fremont, California, the older of 2 daughters in a family that, from the outside, looked like a straightforward immigrant success story. My father, Rajesh, ran a small but steady accounting practice out of a strip mall office. My mother, Meena, taught piano lessons out of our living room 3 afternoons a week. My younger sister, Kavya, 25, had always been the one everyone described first when introducing our family. Vibrant, social, effortlessly likable in a way that made people forgive things they wouldn't have forgiven in anyone else.
I was the quiet one, the one who studied, the one who, at 22, graduated top of my class from UC Davis with a degree in political science and a plan to go to law school, specifically to specialize in corporate and securities law, a field I'd fallen in love with during an undergraduate internship that showed me for the first time what it looked like to actually build financial structures instead of just balancing someone else's books. My father hated the plan from the moment I mentioned it. "Law school is 7 years of debt for a career you could build faster in accounting," he said, at a dinner I still remember in exact detail. "You could join my practice. Steady income. No risk." I didn't want steady. I wanted the thing I'd actually fallen in love with. I applied anyway, funded the LSAT prep myself with money from a part-time job, and got into a program in Sacramento with a partial scholarship that covered most, though not all, of the cost. The gap, roughly $40,000 over 3 years, became the defining financial struggle of my 20s. I worked 2 part-time jobs throughout law school. I lived in a shared apartment with 3 roommates, ate the same 6 meals on rotation because they were cheap and filling, and turned down every unpaid networking opportunity that would have actually helped my career because I couldn't afford to work for free. Meanwhile, my parents paid for Kavya's entire college experience outright. Tuition, housing, a car for her 21st birthday, a study abroad semester in Florence. That alone cost more than a full year of my law school tuition gap. When I asked my mother, gently, once, why the approach seemed so different between us, she said something I've never fully been able to unhear. "Kavya needs more support to find her way. You've always been able to figure things out on your own." I told myself that was a compliment for years. It took a long time to understand it as what it actually was. A quiet, permanent justification for an imbalance nobody in my family wanted to examine directly. I graduated law school with just under $90,000 in debt, passed the bar on my first attempt, and took an associate position at a mid-sized firm in Oakland, the kind of job that paid well enough to start chipping away at the debt, but demanded 60-hour weeks in return. I told myself it was temporary, a stepping stone towards something better, and for 2 years I put my head down and worked. The fellowship at Meridian Capital appeared on my radar 18 months ago, a highly competitive year-long program that placed a small handful of associates directly into the firm's securities litigation group, with a path to full partnership track that normally took associates 7 to 8 years to reach. Only 12 spots nationally, hundreds of applicants. I'd been quietly preparing my application materials for nearly a year, refining my writing sample, building relationships with partners who could write meaningful recommendation letters, treating the whole process with the same disciplined intensity I'd brought to everything else in my career. I got the interview invitation on a Tuesday in early spring, I remember standing in my kitchen, reading the email 3 times to make sure it was real, before calling my mother to share the news. "That's wonderful, beta," she said, and I could hear genuine warmth in her voice, which made what happened 4 weeks later even harder to reconcile. The interview was scheduled for a Thursday morning at Meridian's San Francisco office. I'd bought exactly one blazer for the occasion, a well-tailored charcoal piece I'd saved for over 2 months to afford, the kind of quality garment I'd never once let myself purchase during law school, when every spare dollar went toward tuition instead of appearance. I decided to spend Wednesday night at my parents' house in Fremont, since it was closer to San Francisco than my apartment in Oakland, and I wanted to be well-rested rather than commuting in early morning traffic on the most important day of my professional life so far. I hung the blazer carefully in the guest room closet around 9 p.m., laid out the rest of my interview outfit on the bed, and reviewed my notes on Meridian's recent cases one final time before setting my alarm for 5:30. I woke up at 5:30 exactly, the way I always do the morning of something important, before the alarm even had a chance to sound. I showered, went through my mental checklist of talking points one more time, and walked to the guest room closet at 6:15 to get dressed. The moment I opened the closet door, I knew something was wrong. The smell hit me first. Sharp, chemical, unmistakable. My blazer, which I'd hung so carefully 12 hours earlier, was streaked with irregular white and yellow patches across both shoulders and down the left sleeve, the fabric already stiffening in places where the bleach had eaten through the dye and begun degrading the material itself. I stood there for what felt like a very long time, holding the ruined jacket, my mind refusing to fully process what I was looking at, with less than 90 minutes until I needed to walk into the most important interview of my career. I walked down the hallway, still holding the blazer, and found my mother in the kitchen, already up making chai, and my father reading something on his phone at the table. "Someone poured bleach on my blazer," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "It's completely ruined." My mother's eyes went to the jacket, then flickered, almost imperceptibly, toward the hallway leading to Kavia's room, before settling back on me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "Are you sure it wasn't already damaged? Maybe from the dry cleaner?" "Mom, this happened last night. I hung it up perfectly clean at 9. My father set down his phone. "Priya, keep your voice down. Your sister is still sleeping." "My interview is in 90 minutes, and my only blazer is destroyed, and you're worried about waking Kavya up?" That's when Kavya appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in a robe, looking, I noted, even in my panic, entirely too alert for someone supposedly just woken up. "What's going on?" she said, glancing at the blazer in my hands with an expression that struck me, even then, as slightly too composed. "Someone bleached my interview blazer, Kavya. Do you know anything about that? Why would I know anything about that? Maybe you spilled something on it yourself and don't remember? You've been so stressed lately." I looked at my sister for a long moment, searching her face for any flicker of guilt, any crack in the performance, and found none. I've thought about that morning many times since, and the detail that still unsettles me most isn't the bleach itself. It's how completely calm she was standing in that doorway, watching me hold the ruined evidence of what she'd done. "I don't have time for this," I finally said. "I need to leave in an hour. I don't have another blazer." My father stood up from the table, and for one brief moment, I thought he might actually address what had happened directly. Instead, he said, "Priya, please, don't make a scene right before you leave. Whatever happened, happened. You'll figure something out. You always do. You always do." The same phrase my mother had used years earlier to explain why Kavya received unconditional financial support while I received none. In that kitchen, at 6:20 in the morning, with 90 minutes until the biggest interview of my career, I finally understood that phrase for what it actually was. Not an acknowledgement of my competence,
but a permission slip for my family to consistently choose the path of least resistance whenever choosing me required any actual effort or accountability. I didn't have another blazer. I didn't have time to buy one, and even if I had, nothing would be open at 6:20 in the morning. I looked at the ruined jacket in my hands, at the streaked bleach patterns across the shoulders, and made a decision in about 4 seconds that I'm still, months later, glad I made. "Fine," I said. "I'll wear it exactly like this." My mother's face changed. "Priya, you can't walk into an interview looking like that. What will they think?" "I don't know, Mom. Let's find out." I put on the blazer over my blouse, the fabric stiff and unnatural against my arms where the bleach had chemically altered its texture, the bleach stains stark and undeniable across both shoulders in the early morning light. I looked, genuinely, like someone who'd had a household accident hours before an interview, which was, in fact, exactly what had happened. I drove to San Francisco in near silence, my hands tight on the wheel, running through every possible way this could go. Laughed out of the building, quietly redirected to the elevator before I even made it to the waiting room, a polite dismissal disguised as professionalism. By the time I parked near Meridian's building, I'd made peace, as much as I could in the moment, with the very real possibility that I was about to lose the most important professional opportunity of my career because of something entirely outside my control. I walked into the lobby at 8:47, 13 minutes early, and gave my name to the receptionist, who glanced up, took in the blazer for exactly 1 beat too long, and said nothing beyond directing me toward the elevator. The waiting room on the 14th floor held 4 other candidates, all dressed in what I assumed were expensively tailored, unblemished suits, all of them, at various points, glancing at my jacket with expressions ranging from confusion to poorly concealed amusement. I sat with my portfolio in my lap, spine straight, and reminded myself silently that I had earned this interview slot through 18 months of preparation that had nothing to do with the condition of my clothing. At 9:03, a tall man in his 50s, silver-haired, wearing the kind of understated suit that signals real seniority rather than performed status, stepped into the waiting room, holding a clipboard. "Priya Anand?" I stood. "That's me." He glanced down at his clipboard, then up at me, his eyes moving very briefly across the bleach stains on my shoulders, and I braced myself for whatever polite, dismissive comment was about to follow. Instead, something in his expression shifted. Not amusement, not judgment, but a kind of startled recognition, like he was cross-referencing something in his memory against what he was seeing in front of him. "Anand," he repeated slowly, looking back down at the name on his clipboard, then at my face again. "Wait, you're her?" I had absolutely no idea, standing in that waiting room in a chemically ruined blazer with 4 other candidates watching, what he could possibly mean by that question. "I'm sorry," I said, carefully. "I don't think we've met before. I'm Priya Anand, here for the fellowship interview." He studied my face for another moment, then extended his hand. "Marcus Wexler. I'm the partner leading the securities litigation group here. Forgive me, I need to ask, are you the same Priya Anand who wrote the amicus brief on the Halberd financial disclosure case last year? The one referenced in the Ninth Circuit opinion?" My stomach dropped in a completely different direction than I'd braced for. During my second year at the Oakland firm, I'd spent nearly 4 unpaid weekends drafting research for a senior partner's amicus brief in a securities disclosure case, work that had gone out under the firm's name, with my own contribution acknowledged only in a single footnote most people never read. I hadn't expected anyone outside my own firm to have connected my name to it at all. I contributed research to that brief, yes. I didn't realize anyone outside my firm had seen the footnote. Marcus laughed, an actual, genuine laugh. "I read every footnote in that brief, Ms. Anand, because the argument in Section 3 was, frankly, more sophisticated than anything else in the filing, and I spent a week trying to figure out who'd actually written it before someone at your old firm mentioned your name off the record. I've been hoping you'd apply here for over a year. When I saw your name on today's interview list, I moved my morning schedule specifically to make sure I was the one who greeted you." I stood there in the waiting room, in a bleach-stained blazer, completely unprepared for the conversation to open this way. "I have to ask," Marcus said, gesturing slightly toward my shoulder, his tone shifting into something gentler. "Is everything all right? That's quite a chemical burn pattern for something recent."
I made a split-second decision. The same instinct that had gotten me through 4 years of quietly absorbing my family's imbalances without making them anyone else's problem. And then, for the first time in my adult life, I chose honesty instead. My blazer was ruined last night, hours before this interview, by a family member. I didn't have time to replace it, and I made the decision that wearing it anyway was better than missing this opportunity entirely. Marcus's expression didn't shift into pity, which I'd half expected and would have found unbearable. Instead, something like respect settled into his face. "Ms. Anand, in 11 years of running this fellowship program, I have interviewed candidates who showed up in perfectly tailored suits their parents bought them, reciting talking points their parents helped them rehearse. I have never once interviewed someone who showed up in a ruined blazer specifically because giving up wasn't an option they were willing to consider. Please, come with me. I'd like to hear about the Halberd brief directly from the person who actually understood the doctrine well enough to write it." The interview that followed lasted nearly 90 minutes, twice the allotted time, largely because Marcus kept asking follow-up questions that had nothing to do with a standard interview script, and everything to do with genuine intellectual curiosity about how I'd approached the securities disclosure issue differently than the senior partner whose name had appeared on the final filing. Near the end, he set down his notes and looked at me directly. "I'm going to be honest with you, since you were honest with me. You're one of the strongest candidates I've interviewed in this cycle, possibly in the 3 cycles before it. I don't need to see you in a different jacket to know that. But I am curious, and you don't have to answer this if it's too personal. Why would a family member sabotage something this important to you?" I thought about my father's dismissive comment at the kitchen table. I thought about years of unequal support quietly justified as some kind of natural difference in our characters, rather than a choice my parents kept making, over and over, in Kavya's favor. I thought about the phrase, "you always figure things out," and how long it had taken me to recognize it as a burden disguised as a compliment. "I think," I said slowly, "some people build their entire identity around being the one who gets protected, and they panic when someone in the family stops needing that protection more than they do." Marcus nodded slowly, like something in that answer confirmed a judgment he'd already quietly reached. That's a more honest answer than most people give in exit interviews after they've already lost a job over family dysfunction, let alone in an entrance interview for a fellowship they clearly want badly. 3 days later, I received an email from Meridian Capital's HR department offering me one of the 12 fellowship spots, effective in 6 weeks. I read the email 4 times before I let myself believe it was real, the same way I'd read the interview invitation months earlier. I called my mother first, out of habit more than desire, and told her the news. There was a pause on the line before she said, "That's wonderful, Beta. I always knew you'd figure it out." That phrase again. I always knew you'd figure it out. I sat with that sentence for a long moment, feeling something shift permanently in how I understood my relationship with my family. And then I said something I'd never said to my mother before in 29 years. "Mom, I need you to actually hear this. I didn't figure it out because I'm naturally more capable than Kavya, or because I need less support than she does. I figured it out because I've spent my entire life being told, in a dozen small ways, that figuring things out alone was my job, while Kavya's job was to be protected. I got this fellowship despite what happened Wednesday night, not because our family handled it well. Someone destroyed the only professional clothing I owned 12 hours before the most important interview of my career, and both of you told me not to make a scene about it." The silence on the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "I know," my mother finally said, quietly. "I've known for a long time, Priya. I didn't know how to say it out loud without it feeling like I was choosing against your sister.
You don't have to choose against her, Mom. You just have to stop choosing against me by default every single time and calling it something else. I started the fellowship at Meridian Capital 6 weeks later, and the first thing I did with my initial signing bonus, before paying down a single dollar of my law school debt, was buy myself 3 well-tailored blazers from a proper tailor in San Francisco. It wasn't practical. Diane, my new mentor at the firm, later told me it was the smartest first purchase she'd seen a fellow make in 11 years of the program, because it wasn't about the clothing at all. The months that followed were the most demanding of my career, 12-hour days learning securities litigation at a level of depth I'd only glimpsed in law school, working directly under Marcus on 2 active cases, absorbing more in 4 months than I had in 2 years at my previous firm. I threw myself into it partly out of genuine passion, and partly, I'll admit, because it gave me somewhere